Peter B. Collins, News and Comment. It's Friday, August 2nd, 2016. Today's podcast, dedicated to the memory of bass virtuoso Rob Wasserman, will pay tribute at the end of this program. But I begin with a stunning, shocking announcement, so prepare yourselves. I have decided that I am going to support Donald Trump for president. President of Uzbekistan. Now, I'm sure it's a tragedy to people who live in Uzbekistan, but the longtime dictator, a guy who's been in power since before the Soviet Union broke up, passed away this week after a stroke, Islam Karimov, who gives veteran strongman a true definition, ran that country with an iron fist. And he really sets a model for the dictator that Donald Trump would like to be. The kind of guy who just says, it's going to happen the day I get into the White House. I snap my fingers, and everything falls into place. The illegal immigrant criminals will disappear, and life as we know it will be perfect in America. That's the kind of mythology that Donald Trump promotes. And so the funeral is tomorrow. There is no announced successor for Karimov. And Donald Trump could fly into Uzbekistan and just take over. He would wow them with his hair and with Melania and the kids, and just imagine how that could be. And if the Donald isn't up for it, my runner-up nominee would be Herman Cain. You remember him, the candidate who ran back in 2012? He's a pizza. He made a fortune on a pizza chain. And famously, Herman Cain was asked a trick question, and he said, well, if you're going to ask me who's running Uzbekistan, I probably don't know. Well, Herman's had 4 years to figure that out. And now that there's a job opening there in Uzbekistan, running a nation of 31 million people, well, maybe one of those two dudes, Trump or Herman Cain, might want to apply for the job. Now, Donald Trump, our would-be dictator, is a practiced liar. He's really compulsive about it. And when you watch him give a speech, even when it's a scripted speech, he cannot help but exaggerate things. And so I appreciate that The Guardian has a reporter based here in San Francisco, Alan Uhas, and every week on Friday they publish a list of the lies that Donald Trump told just in the past week. So let's run through them quickly here. Quote from Trump, "We did discuss the wall. We didn't discuss payment of the wall. That will be for a later date." Well, Mexico's President Enrique Peña Nieto directly contradicted Trump's account of their meeting, saying on Twitter, "At the start of the conversation with Donald Trump, I made it clear that Mexico will not pay for the wall." Okay? Who are you going to believe? Then, in his speech in Phoenix, he said that illegal immigration costs our country more than $113 billion a year, and no one can come up with any kind of reasonable method that reaches a number that high. And I'll just spare you the details here. Back in 2007, an analysis by the Congressional Budget Office concluded that the cost of immigrants is most likely modest to governments at any level. Then, in the speech in Phoenix, he said, "Our government has no idea," referring to how many immigrants there are. It could be 3 million. It could be 30 million. They have no idea. Well, the government has a pretty good idea based on the census, and that number is between 11.3 and 11.5 million people. And it's not true that the government has no idea, and it's not true that it could be 30 million. Those are pure fantasies, bogus claims made by Trump. Then he said, "President Obama and Hillary Clinton have engaged in gross dereliction of duty by surrendering the safety of the American people to open borders." Well, we don't have any open borders, and President Obama has deported more than 2.5 million people since he took office. Do they think our borders are open? Then, in the same speech, Trump said Hillary Clinton has pledged amnesty in her first 100 days. Her plan will provide Obamacare, Social Security, and Medicare for illegal immigrants. That is just purely untrue. And, of course, the Republicans use the term amnesty to talk about any remote possibility of a currently undocumented person staying in this country after the draconian reforms that the right wing imagines. Trump also lied when he said Clinton's plan is to bring in 620,000 new refugees from Syria. Now, we know that's just completely untrue, and Jeff Sessions, the Neanderthal senator from Alabama, is the guy who appears to be responsible for this miscalculation. And basically, because Hillary has said that she wants to allow 55,000 Syrian refugees in the country next year, that they project that over a 5 or 7 year period and just hit the calculator button and don't lift their fingers. So those are just a few examples of the lies that we know Donald Trump uttered this week. Now, did Hillary Clinton lie to the FBI? They're saying she didn't. And today, it just happened shortly before I sat down behind the microphone here, the FBI has released the file on the Hillary Clinton email investigation. And it includes the notes. There was no transcript from her July, what was it? It was on Saturday, I think that was July 2nd, when they took her in and asked her questions. And based on the notes that have been published, again, she was not under oath, and they didn't bother to record this or have a stenographer. You know, nobody had an iPhone that they could have recorded it with. I mean, you and I would have been resourceful enough to actually capture what she had to say. But no, not the FBI. They took notes, and there's about 12 pages of notes, and a preliminary examination indicates that she gave them many of the same answers that she has given the American public. But, of course, some of those answers aren't true, particularly when it comes to the issue of whether she sent or received classified information. There will be more on this coming up in the next few weeks, we can be sure. Well, it's pretty clear that the corporate entity that controls the presidential debates will not change the rules and allow Gary Johnson or Jill Stein to participate. And today they have announced the milquetoast anchors who will question the presidential and vice presidential candidates in 3 debates for the top 2 and 1 debate for the VEEPs. So Lester Holt, the milquetoast anchor of the NBC Nightly News, will moderate the first debate on September 26th. Martha Raddatz of ABC, who did a lousy job back in 2012 on a debate that was supposed to be focused on foreign policy, and no tough questions were presented. Anderson Cooper of CNN will, co-moderate with Raddatz on October 9th. And then the very first Fox News anchor assigned to a presidential debate, Chris Wallace, will be manning the final debate on October 19th. And I don't know this woman, but Elaine Quijano of CBS News will be moderating the vice presidential debate on October 4th with the star power of Mike Pence and Tim Kaine. Man, we're going to need Red Bull to sponsor that debate just to keep anybody awake. We can't expect much out of these debates except the wild card of Donald Trump. How will he attempt to slime Hillary, and how will she fight back? And will these moderators be able to control Donald Trump? Nobody has so far. And so I'm not too optimistic that these are going to be remembered as great debates. It will be more like a World Wrestling Federation smackdown. I want to recommend a great piece written by my friend Pepe Escobar that appears at Counterpunch and was originally published at RT, I think, about this week's sad events in Brasilia. And as you may know, Pepe Escobar doesn't live in Brazil. He's from there, but he can't stand Brazil because of the corruption. The political corruption there just overwhelms him. And so he lives in a kind of self-imposed exile. And he wrote a piece called Brazil's Dilma Rousseff, a woman of honor, confronts Senate of scoundrels. And Pepe really characterized this well, that he believes that Dilma Rousseff was not convicted of any meaningful crime, that this was the kind of coup that many have suggested, didn't require movements of the military. It was internally executed through a jaundiced political process. He writes that Rousseff's impeachment means, in practice, that democratic voting in one of the world's largest democracies will be canceled by a parliamentary coup remote-controlled by oligarchic interests. This is not and never was about justice. It's about dirty, nasty politics. There is no techno-bureaucrat argument whatsoever capable of proving the president should be impeached because of state budget maneuvers that did not yield a single cent for her pockets or to the detriment of the Treasury, and this in an astonishingly corruption-infested nation. And he says the deal that has been unsealed here was the Lula and Dilma presidencies of the People's Party, and he said there was a sort of unwritten pact between the social classes. The rich got even richer, while the poor got less poor. And that's going to be reversed, and only the first part will be in effect. The rich will continue to get more wealthy, and the poor will certainly suffer. And the economy has been hammered. It's going to take quite a while for any recovery to occur. And with the kind of austerity that is expected to be imposed and cuts to social programs, we can see that Brazil is on track to become the next economically failed state like Venezuela, which is where we're going next here in a moment. A couple of more quotes from Pepe Escobar. Immediately after Dilma's impeachment, the Senate plans to throw what literally amounts to a fiscal party based on raised salaries for Supreme Court ministers. These salaries regulate the remuneration of all Brazilian public service. So by giving raises to the judges who have given their blessing to this illegal impeachment process, they're going to reward themselves by increasing pay for all the corrupt people in the government while they cut services and programs for the impoverished people of Brazil. And Pepe reminds us Dilma is being accused of fiscal irresponsibility. And he goes on in his own style here that is just so perfectly Pepe. Many scoundrels/vultures will be dividing the spoils of a dead democracy. What matters is that the number one profiteer of impeachment will be the goddess of the market. That also includes big business, mainstream media, a monopoly of 5 families, and, of course, exceptionalism. Their mandate is clear. The presidency is just a detail. So what's next? The highly fragmented, hyper-conservative Congress will circle their wagons against anything that threatens their privileges. The Attorney General will hardly have the temerity to really investigate the new president, Temer the usurper, and other politicians. Although there is serious evidence of corruption against them all, the shield will protect them. And in the end, says Pepe Escobar, Dilma Rousseff will exit with her head held high. As for the angel of history, he will show the scoundrels no mercy. And as mentioned, things have reached a critical low point in Venezuela, as we are seeing hundreds of thousands of people take to the streets, and a real critical food shortage that is producing not only widespread hunger, but a lot of conflicts at supermarkets and other points of distribution. And the Maduro government is facing this huge backlash from the oligarchs of Venezuela, who are empowered and enabled by the United States. And with the continuing low price of crude oil, Venezuela, which requires petroleum exports to keep its economy afloat, has no real light at the end of any proverbial tunnel. And the economy is shutting down. People who fix cars for a living say the people with cars can't afford to have their cars worked on. And so the cycle downward is spiraling very quickly. And the Maduro government is trying to avoid bad publicity by keeping foreign media out. They immediately deported the Miami Herald's reporter who came in with a current visa. And so it's getting very ugly there, and there doesn't appear to be any rescue plan in motion for the nation of Venezuela. The Kurds are appropriately concerned that the U.S. will betray them, or has betrayed them, again. And I find it interesting today in the New York Times, there's a good story about this. Kurds fear the U.S. will again betray them in Syria. And it took the Times a week to figure this out. It was last week when I told you, after Joe Biden visited Istanbul and instructed the Kurds to stay on the other side of the Euphrates River, sending the signal that the U.S. was siding with Turkey over the Kurds, who have been the bulwark, the stalwart fighters, the proxy fighters for the United States in Syria and Iraq. Now, there are a couple of different types of Kurds, and I don't really need to explain that to you at this point. But the fundamental is that the Turkish Kurds are the primary target of the Turkish government. And listen to this paragraph. So, while the first aim of Turkey's incursion last month into northern Syria was to push the Islamic State from the border town of Jarablus, many believe Turkey's primary goal was to thwart Kurdish territorial ambitions. Well, we saw this played out over the past year. Turkey made a deal with Obama saying, yeah, we're going to help you fight the Islamic State, yeah. And all they've done is hammer the Kurds in their own country or on the borders. And this language used here, where the first aim was to fight the Islamic State, but the primary goal was to fight the Kurds? I'll let you struggle with that language, as you can clearly see I am. So the history is ugly. And the United States has used the Kurds and abandoned them over time. Happened in the 1970s when Henry Kissinger pulled the plug on Kurds in the region. And many Kurds now say that they see the writing on the wall, and they think that once the Islamic State is driven out of its capital of Raqqa in Syria, the United States will sell them out. I think we already did that. And it's just another ugly artifact of the Obama era. There's an interesting article over at Think Progress, and Ian Millhiser, who occasionally listens to our podcast, sent me a link to it. And he writes about voting rights and has covered these issues, I think, in some detail. And this week, the U.S. Supreme Court, while it isn't currently in session, they polled the members, and there was a 4-4 split. And that means, and by the way, the issue before them was an appeal of North Carolina's obvious voter suppression law. And that's the law that an appeals court judge said was surgically targeted to exclude black voters. But 4 members of the Supreme Court, the Republicans, voted to reinstate the lion's share of North Carolina's voter suppression law. And if Scalia were still alive, it's all but certain that North Carolina's plan to restrict black voting would have succeeded. And in this same article, there's an interesting map of the it reflects the recent voting rights decisions of the federal circuit courts and the appeals courts across the country. And I'm linking to it so you can take a look at the color map, because it shows that essentially the cases that come from southern states are seen sympathetically when voter suppression is the goal. But the argument advanced is, we're just protecting election integrity. We're trying to stamp out voter fraud where it doesn't exist. And it's sad to see us caught up in that battle during a critical election year. Every day I like to pause for a second and thank the people who support my work here at the Peter B. Collins podcast, like DGL, Anna Gordonier, Mona Kobus, and the incredible Faith Peoples. Thank you, one and all, for your support. And over this holiday weekend, why don't you take a minute to come on over to peterbcollins.com and set yourself up with a subscription. I'd be much obliged. All you do is look for the menu button, click on that, pull down Become a Subscriber. It takes you to the sign-up page. That's where the bonus books are displayed if you take out a new annual subscription, and give me a mailing address in the continental United States. I try to keep that brief. Interesting piece at The Intercept today, and commendations to reporter Sam Biddle, because somehow he came into possession of a catalog from the British defense firm Cobham. And Cobham sells all kinds of gear to American police agencies. And at a recent conference where cops go to buy gizmos, this 120-page catalog was purloined or somehow acquired. Now, Cobham, again, is a British company. They spun off its tactical communications and surveillance business, and they renamed it Domo Tactical Communications earlier this year. I have no idea why they did that, but I think it's interesting that they bothered to do it. And the article cites a privacy advocate, Richard Tynan at Privacy International. He said, by design, these devices are indiscriminate and operate across a wide area where many people may be present. They are, he said, the essence of mass surveillance. And that, of course, is in direct conflict with our Fourth Amendment when it is not considered optional by the courts these days. And so what we're seeing is that this is the competition for the American manufacturer of the Stingray suite of products. That's Harris Corporation in Florida. And the competition in Britain has a similar system to Stingray. Here's reading from the puffery in the catalog. It says, the devices in this catalog are standard interception devices with the ability to masquerade as 1 to 4 base stations simultaneously. This is where you create a phony cell tower and get all the nearby phones to check in with you and dump their data. Well, this would allow it to pretend to be 4 different operators or 4 base stations from the same operator or any combination. And it allows for interception of up to 200 handsets, that's telephones, smartphones, per minute. And so they can capture a whole lot of information, and they can take control of the target phones. That means they can perform functions like turn on the camera, turn on the microphone without your knowledge. They can grab all of your contacts. They can read your emails and your text messages, and they can capture your voicemail. And we're told that while American companies have these functionalities from the Harris devices called Stingray and a competitor called Dirtbox, we're told, don't worry, we don't use them. And, of course, I consider that to be pure and unadulterated, hot and stinky bullshit. Well, here's an interesting enterprise story from the New York Times today that made the front page, and it focuses on a county in Indiana, Dearborn County, which issues incredibly long criminal sentences for incredibly minor crimes. And the pattern is that small counties are convicting and over-sentencing individuals and filling up prisons across the country. And they cite an example of a guy named Donnie Gaddis. Donnie got convicted of selling 15 pills of hillbilly heroin. That would be your OxyContin or oxycodone. 15 pills, and he was convicted and sentenced to 12 years in state prison. If he had been tried just down the road a few miles in Cincinnati, where I grew up, he would have been given 6 months. And if he had been tried in Brooklyn, New York, or in San Francisco, the informed speculation is he would have been diverted into drug treatment. Here's another case. Scott Huey, age 36, sold 7 grams of heroin, got 35 years. Now, the guy who convicts all these guys, Aaron Negengard, the prosecutor in Dearborn County, said, I'm proud of the fact that we send more people to jail than other counties. And they send more people to prison than San Francisco does or Westchester County, New York, which each have 13 times as many people. And in order to fill up these jails, they spend a lot of money to build new prisons. And as a result, they don't have any money for drug treatment, even though 225 of the 250 inmates in the Dearborn County lockup are there for drug issues. That's America today. Steve Horn, the great investigative reporter who publishes at the Smog Blog and elsewhere, has dug into some of the connections related to the controversial Dakota Access Pipeline that's been the focus of Native American protests this summer. And he has discovered that the senator from North Dakota, Republican John Hoeven, supports the Dakota Access Pipeline because it's going to help make him more wealthy. The reason is Senator Hoeven is an investor in 68 different oil-producing wells in North Dakota through a company called Mainstream Investors. And so this just shows the kind of conflict of interest that is common in many of these issues. And there's some interesting documents, too, that Steve Horn got a hold of. I'm linking to his report in the show file for this podcast at peterbcollins.com. The SpaceX rocket that had the Facebook satellite perched atop it was on the gantry there at Cape Canaveral, Florida. The launch wasn't scheduled for a couple of days, but yesterday it all blew up. And Facebook's $200 million satellite went kaboom. It was a pretty spectacular explosion, and it raises questions about whether Elon Musk, the guy who also has a solar company and is the founder of the Tesla electric car company, is a little overextended and trying to do things too rapidly. I can't judge that. But the bigger issue is that we have tried to privatize rocket launches and space exploration in order to reduce the budget at NASA, and this is a byproduct of that, in my humble opinion. And this story from France, where it appears somebody is trying to put the Coke back in Coca-Cola. As you may know, the original fountain concoction called Coca-Cola did contain trace amounts of cocaine when it was legal.
I'd like to teach the world to sing with me. Perfect harmony. Perfect harmony. I'd like to buy the world a Coke and keep it company.
We'll have to change the song to I'd Like to Buy the World Some Coke. $56 million of cocaine showed up in orange juice concentrate shipped into the Coca-Cola factory in southern France this week. Well, not quite the real thing without some actual coca in the drink. And finally today, I want to pay tribute to Rob Wasserman, a virtuoso bass player best known for his collaborations with Lou Reed, the Grateful Dead, and Bob Weir's Rat Dog Band. And Rob passed away a couple of months ago of cancer. They held a memorial service and concert for him this week. And Bob Weir and friends performed. They trotted out some old footage of Ricky Lee Jones and some other great moments. Rob Wasserman was a committed player of the bass, the stand-up bass. And he used it in many configurations, many different ways. He produced a first album of just him playing the bass, then duets with people like Ricky Lee Jones and Lou Reed and Jerry Garcia, and then he did a suite of trio recordings, all based on that bass. And Rob was a kind of quiet, studious guy with a good, dry sense of humor. I got to work with him on a couple of occasions, and he was extremely professional. No drama, no theatrics. But when he got on stage and worked that bass, it was an incredible thing to see. And due to music licensing issues, I'm going to link to a great YouTube video that shows Rob Wasserman in some of his performance with the bass in a song that he recorded as part of the duets package with the late Lou Reed. Rob Wasserman, thanks for a lot of great music and a lot of great memories, and happy trails to you. That's my news and comment podcast for today. We're off Monday for Labor Day. Back at you Tuesday right here. I'm Peter B. Collins.
Happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling.